Thank you. Let's hear it again for Miko. Thank you. So this month we celebrate Thanksgiving, and so we naturally turn our thoughts to giving and being grateful. And we see it mined in nature with the generosity of the earth and the bounty of the harvest. And so as I was researching Thanksgiving and generosity and that whole topic, it reminded me of my favorite giving thanks story that I want to share with you. And it's a true story about Carol Matthau, who is Walter Matthau's wife, and Una Chaplin, who was Charlie Chaplin's wife. They were best friends along with Gloria Vanderbilt. And Carol and Una were on the phone, and they lived in New York and California. And Carol was extremely depressed, and so they were on the phone, and Una's doing everything she can to make her friend feel better, but nothing she did helped. So they hung up, and Una was feeling helpless, like, what can I do to show my friend how much I love her and care about her? So she sent her a diamond bracelet as a gift. So you can imagine Carol Matthau's surprise when she saw a note that said, I hope you're feeling better and I hope this helps. And here was a diamond bracelet. And Carol was so overwhelmed by it all that, how do you thank somebody for a gift like that, right? So she thought about it, and then she wrote a note and sent it back. And Una opened the note, and it said, still depressed, keep them coming. In Proverbs 18:16, we read, a gift opens the way and ushers the giver into the presence of the great. So we give because and without even knowing it, when we give, it opens us to the presence of the divine. It opens us to the presence of the great. And in the giving of her gift, she was basically connecting with the unconditional love that she had for her. So the basic premise of generosity is that whatever it is that you need in your life, that is what you need to give. It is a basic spiritual principle through which we can all benefit. In Proverbs 11:25, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. So we're hearing, remember we talked about the golden rule a couple weeks ago, that as we give, we receive. And in this spiritual principle, the way it works is whatever it is you need in your life, if you are lacking something in your life, that is what you need to give. So if it's money that you're lacking, then it's money that needs to be given. And that's why a spiritual principle is a tithe. Now, a tithe has not been put together so churches can make money, although that helps. But the spiritual principle behind tithing is that, and 10% is that it makes us think about what we're doing, but it also makes us stop and go, okay, so where was I connected to God? Where was I spiritually inspired so that I can give to that? And so it's like a spigot that opens up the flow of energy. And the truth is that if you're not comfortable giving 10%, you can give 5%, you can give 1%, It's important to start because, again, it's like opening a spigot. If you're lacking in friends, what do you need to do? You need to be a friend, right? Maybe call somebody that you haven't talked to in a long time, or find them on Facebook. If you need love, what is it you need to give? It is love. So no matter what it is that we are needing, that is where we know we need to give it. Eckhart Tolle said that you cannot receive what you don't give. Outflow determines inflow. The other process in giving is that it makes us stop and give thanks, because if we don't feel generous, right, if we're not feeling prosperous ourselves, it's very difficult to give. So the process of giving helps us to feel more prosperous. So giving then connects us to the divine and opens the door to receiving. But wait, there's still more. In Luke 6:38, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So giving not only opens the door to receiving, but what Jesus is saying is as you give, it's coming back to you, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be poured into your lap. So it comes back to you tenfold. Now here's the deal. It comes back to us whether it's positive or negative. It doesn't matter, right? It's what we're putting out there. So if we're putting out negativity, we'll get that pressed down, shaken together, and running over. If we're putting out love and kindness, compassion, that comes back to us, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. It's a spiritual law. The word generosity conjures up images of flow, of happiness, of movement. So as we go forward in this talk, I'd like for you to reflect on this idea of who has been generous to you, and how has that changed your life? Has anyone been generous to you, and how have they been generous? And then what are some of the acts of generosity that you have given to other? Perhaps it's your children, perhaps it's your partner, or your neighbors, or people that you work with. Perhaps it's simply an act of generosity that you observed, right? That you weren't even a part of it, that you witnessed another act of generosity, and then looking at yourself and saying, so how did that affect me as well? What I've noticed is that I think that sometimes we are more apt to remember acts of generosity that were given to us rather than acts of generosity that we may have given to others. An example of this is when I first moved to Missouri, I was living in an apartment, and it was a rainy day, it was cloudy, it was ugly outside, and the sirens started to go off around town. And being new to Missouri, I didn't quite know what that meant, and I was on the phone with my mother, and I kept saying, you know, the sirens keep going off, and I'm not sure if it's a tornado, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do with that. So I ignored it, and I'm still on the phone, and this is the day, this is before cell phones. And then about 10, 15 minutes into the conversation, there's a banging on my door. And it was a new girlfriend that I had just, met. And she said, Karen, do you not hear the sirens? I've been calling you for 10 minutes, and your line is busy. There's a tornado coming. You need to get out of your apartment. I was on the second floor, and she lived in a basement apartment. She picked me up. She drove me to her apartment, and, we waited it out. That's an act of generosity. And we lost touch with each other for about 10 or 15 years, and I ran into her at a conference or something, and I said, I always think about that time and how grateful I am to you, and what an act of generosity that was. And she said, I don't remember doing that at all. I was like, really? She goes, but what I remember is one time I was driving my car on the highway in Missouri, and my car stalled, and I pulled over along the highway. And I was sitting there, and I couldn't get the car started, and it was cold outside, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And she said, I sat there, and I said, God, you need to help me. You need to send me somebody right now. And she said, I heard a knocking on my window, and it was you. You had pulled up behind me, and I was like, I don't remember that at all. But isn't that the truth? It's like, I think the reason is that when we are doing an act of generosity, it's like the scripture says that you enter into the presence of the great. And really, we're just a vehicle for being used by Spirit. We're a vehicle being used by God. And that's why there's the memory around it seems to go. So one of the things with all the stuff that's going on in the world, we may ask ourselves, how do we keep equanimity in these troubling times in which we live? And I want to share with you from a Buddhist teacher named James Shaheen. He said, it is important during such dispiriting times to recall the infinity of small actions that support what is good in life. And it would be a mistake to dismiss their power. What kind of effect our daily actions have at home, at work, and among our fellows will depend in part on what kind of mind we bring to the world. And this is where the heart of Buddhist teachings lie. It is not for us to calculate the impact of our unhistoric acts, but we can rest in the knowledge that it is through such actions that goodness is transmitted and sustained. Goodness is transmitted and sustained. And that is our work, and that is what we can do on a daily basis. Sometimes it's witnessing the acts of generosity, even small, that may change us. So here's a generosity story. This happened in June of this year in a little town called Scottsburg, Indiana. And it was at McDonald's. And a woman's in the drive up, and she paid for her meal, and she looks in the back, and she sees a minivan and a guy and 4 kids. And she says to the cashier, she said, I want to pay for this guy's, meal, and just say Happy Father's Day. Okay. So that was a nice act of generosity. So the dad gets to the line, says, you don't have to pay, Happy Father's Day. Oh, okay. Well, I'll pay for the car behind me. Okay. Well, then that person paid for the car behind them. This went on from 8:30 until midnight, 167 cars without breaking it was almost broken around 100-something, and so the McDonald's workers got together and they paid for the meal because they didn't want it to be broken. And so this went on car after car after car, and the only reason it stopped was because the restaurant closed. And the last person in line was like begging them, please let me buy something. And they said, no, we have to close. Now, on the grand scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. I mean, big deal. You got a free cheeseburger, But there's something about the act of generosity that touched everybody, right? Through our actions, goodness is transmitted and maintained. And what we saw at that McDonald's that day was that goodness was transmitted and maintained. And a gift opens the way and ushers the giver into the presence of the great. So in that McDonald's line, there was the presence of the great. Another story I heard is that it seems inconsequential, but when this man tells a story about when he was a little kid, he said, we went to the beach, and my mom packed a picnic lunch. And we're sitting down at the beach, and we get chicken and, potato salad. And she looks over at the parking lot, and she sees a man rummaging through the garbage for food. So she picks up a plate, hands it to him, and then came back, never said a word to her kids, never said a word, and they just went on. And the man said that act changed his life, that it changed how he looked at everything and how he showed up in life. And when his mom was old, he says, Mom, that moment changed my life, and guess what? She didn't remember doing it at all. No memory. She goes, I did that? He goes, yes, you did. Just don't remember. Again, because it's the presence of the great. Giving is done when we have a direct connection to the need. And so the stories get bigger, right? They start small and then they get bigger. So there's a guy in Kenya. His first name is Patrick. And he lives near the Tsavo National Park. Well, there's a drought. Now the rains, this article was written in June, and the rains come back in November. But there's a drought. There's a severe drought. And so the elephants, the antelope, and the water buffalo, they have no water. And they will die from thirst without water. So what this guy does, he's a pea farmer. At 4 nights a week, he goes and he rents a big truck, and he fills it with, it's a tank, so he fills it with water. Some of you may have seen this on Facebook. And he drives to the park, and there's big concrete containers, and he fills it with water. And he does this 4 nights a week, every week. And without that, they would die from thirst. And he said at first when he started doing it, because they're wild animals, they would keep their distance. Now they all stand on the road and they wait for the truck. It's like they're all greeting him. And he said it used to be they would wait till he left before they drank, but now they come, and you can see the video of it. It's quite spectacular. But this is a huge thing that this man is doing. This is like no small feat, and yet he's doing it because he sees it in front of him. Some women have set up a GoFundMe page for him, and he has raised like 133,000 pounds, which helps him rent the truck and get the water. And the goal is to get him to buy his own truck so that he can continue with this work. But he delivers 3,000 gallons of water to the park every week. Again, 4 nights a week. A gift opens the way and ushers the giver into the presence of the great. Can you imagine how he feels in giving this gift? Here's another historic one. I love these, and I think they're great to hear during this season because it puts us in the flow of giving. So a couple who are from Harvard, they were researchers, David Jansen and Winnie Hallwatch, from Princeton, sorry. And in the 90s, they were in Costa Rica and witnessed the deforestation and the wasteland that was there. And of course, they were like, well, what could we do? What can be done with this? And so they had this idea. What if we go to an orange juice company? It's called they went to Del Oro Orange Juice Company, and they said, so, what if you took the rinds from the oranges, that's garbage anyway, and why don't you just dump it on this site? So they said, all right, we'll do that. So they got, some trucks together, and they dumped all these orange peels on this site. Now, it's interesting, so I need to look at the details. The juice company agreed to the deal, and some 12,000 tons of waste orange peel carried by 1,000 trucks was dumped onto this lifeless site. And I think this went on for 1 or 2 years. Well, then an interesting thing happened was the other orange juice company in town didn't want them to do that. They said they were wrecking a park or something, and so they stopped them. They went to the Supreme Court, and they stopped them from doing it anymore. So it was like, all right, well, that was nice. We tried this, and this is the 90s, like 97. So another researcher later on said, I wonder whatever happened with that. So he went back to Costa Rica to try to, to see what the results were of these orange peels being dumped on this wasteland, and he had a terrible time finding it because it had grown into this vast forest with a fig tree that was so big it took 3 people to stand around it to get it to grow. And he said, the sign that had been there was buried under, I'll just read you directly from this article. It turns out the only problem was finding the former wasteland, a challenge that necessitated 2 trips to the site, given the arid landscape had been unrecognizably transformed into a dense, vine-filled jungle. And it didn't help that the 6-foot-long sign with bright yellow lettering marking the site was so overgrown with vines that we literally did not find it until years later. This is in the Popular Science magazine. As for how the orange peels were able to regenerate the site so effectively in just 16 years, nobody knows why. Especially since, in addition to the double win of dealing with waste and revitalizing barren landscapes, richer woodlands also sequester greater amounts of carbon from the atmosphere, meaning little plots of regenerated land like this could ultimately help save the planet. Again, here we go. We have an act of generosity. Given why? Because they saw a need and they did it. Who knows what the repercussions of this will be down the road, but orange peels dumped on a site and left for 15 years can regenerate a rainforest. Is that a blessing or not? A gift opens the way and ushers the giver in to the presence of the great. Again, there it is. So the truth is, you don't know when you will be touched by an act of generosity. You don't know when it's going to show up in your life, whether it's at McDonald's in the drive-thru, or whether you're being helped by a friend, whether it's a tiny little gift like here's a plate of food or a diamond bracelet, When we give, we are in the presence of the divine, right? So whatever it is that you need in your life, think about that. That's what you need to give. That's how you turn on the spigot. That's how you get things moving forward. Give and it will be given, pressed down, shaken together, running over will be poured into your lap. More than we can imagine. We see it in the orange peels. They gave the orange peels and boom, it turns into this amazing rainforest. It blesses the people who are in line at McDonald's. So as we move into this month, and we'll continue with this theme, think about your own acts of generosity. Give thanks for the acts of generosity that have been given and blessed, have blessed you. So, thank you.